onto 13, we can insert the rubber dam and start the preparation of the next cavities. Existing restorations are removed with a high-speed instrument under profuse water spray. We use water to prevent dehydration of the tissue. My preferred instruments are round diamond burrs for the removal of composite materials. After removing the old composite restorations, we can finish the cavity margins with a fine diamond, preferably a flame shape. The bevel should be about 1 mm, maybe a little shorter toward the cervical areas, 45 degrees angulation with the two surfaces. We first insert mylar strips in between the teeth in order to protect neighboring teeth from inadvertent action of the etching gel. We first etch all enamel surfaces for 15 seconds before we also etch dentin for another 15 seconds. The etchant is copiously rinsed with water . Then the excess of water is removed with suction. We can apply the prime and bond NT over all conditioned dentin and enamel surfaces. After careful application, the excess of solvent is removed with air spray before we can light cure the material for 10 seconds. Then we can start with the application of dentin in the depth of the cavities to assume the replacement of missing dentin. As we have seen before, we will use alternatively the end instrument and the microbrush to obtain a perfect adaptation of the restorative material with the cavity. This first dentin increment is light cured for 40 seconds before inserting a second increment. We need to shape the dentin core according to the natural anatomy of the tooth. We actually want to create the space which is needed for the application of enamel. The space will be smaller in the cervical area and larger close to the incisal edge of the tooth, what you can see now from a buccal perspective. You see the increasing space which is given for future enamel application toward the incisal edge. This step must be executed with great care. If we let too much or not enough space for enamel, we'll not end up with a good aesthetic result. We'll perform exactly the same for the next two cavities, class 3 cavities. Since they are relatively small restorations, we must work with relatively small instruments and also the micro brush to adapt the material perfectly to the cavity margins. The use of magnifying lenses is extremely useful for performing this type of restoration. Each layer is light cured separately for 40 seconds while we apply dentin. We must be sure that we maintain the space in between the two teeth for further application of the matrix. We'll apply a small amount of effect material, which is an intensive white color, to mimic the enamel hypocalcifications, which are relatively visible when teeth get dehydrated. This will enhance the natural appearance of the restoration. Since we follow the natural layering concept, the next increment is logically enamel. We try to shape the material as well as we can with our hand instruments and also with the use of the matrix. We only use two basic layers to restore anterior teeth: dentin and enamel, with possibly some effect materials, what you have seen in the previous sequence. We have completed the filling of the three proximal cavities on tooth number 12 and 11, and we can start with the polishing. This is the last but a very important step, because we need to shape the restorations and give them a correct micromorphology on the surface. The first instruments which we use are discs for the proximal contours and the buccal curvature, followed by fine diamond burrs for minor corrections of the margins, interproximal spaces or cervical margins where disc cannot be used. We still smooth the proximal margins with a finishing strip before applying some bonding resin all over the margins to fill existing micro bubbles or defects. A last finishing of interdental spaces is performed before the polishing of the restoration surfaces with fine and extra fine discs. The last steps before removing the rubber dam is the adjustment of the lingual restoration anatomy. The excellent aesthetic result achieved here with Ceram X Duo relies on a simple and logical incremental approach